Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is Quicksand. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of the Quicksand with leather cover designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. Quicksand by Junichiro Tanizaki is a short novel, as most of his novels are, published in 1930. Tanizaki is my favorite Japanese writer, and in Japan he is considered one of the greatest modern novelists. His writings deal mostly with obsessive sexuality, which probably reflect his own inadequacies and curiosities, and also Japanese cultural modernization, which was a very important and controversial subject during Tanizaki's life. Tanizaki was a bit of a contradiction, not unusual for the Japanese, rather liberal in his subjects and willing to shock in his descriptions, but very Japanese and conservative in his lifestyle compared to other modern Japanese writers. Also less ideological and not willing to see suicide as some kind of heroic end. He was one of the pioneers in early Japanese cinema, but it is his novels and short stories that have enjoyed wide popularity, and many have been adapted into films. To me, Tanizaki was a bit of Joseph Conrad of sexuality, willing to go deep into unacknowledged territory and always maintaining his own style. What is Quicksand about? This is a good question. On the surface, it is about taboo and unorthodox, in this case lesbian and triangular and even quadrant love, and all the manipulation, lying, betraying and sacrifices one must do to maintain it alive, and the further complications all of these schemes create. But it is also about fluidity and transformation of the human emotions and how intimate feelings can arise, stimulated by accidental circumstances and conditions out of our control. The book also portrays dynamics of the power struggle and presents sexual love as gender neutral and only limited by our own beliefs. A bit of the plot. The novel is a narration told by a woman, Sonoko, to a rather ambiguous figure who, if the story was told today, would probably be her psychologist, but in the book he seems to be a journalist, maybe even Tanizaki himself, since the story was written over a couple of years as a series in a periodical. Quicksand is more of a journey than destination, since a lot of it is given away at the beginning of the book. Sonoko is referred to as a widow, and she mentions how old Mitsuko would be. The narration starts, "Do forgive me for bothering you again, but I simply had to see you today. I want you to hear my side of the story, from beginning to end." The plot takes place in the 1920s in and around Osaka, and it is interplay between four characters. Besides the narrator, Sonoko Kikuchi, there is her lover, a young girl named Mitsuko, then Sonoko's husband, Kotaro, and Mitsuko's boyfriend, fiancé, Watanuki Ejiro. At the beginning of the story, Sonoko lives a comfortable but dull existence with her husband, and stimulated by boredom, she decides to take an art class. There, because of circumstances out of her control, she becomes friends with Mitsuko. Quickly the relationship intensifies, and as sexual tension between the two grows, it turns into a lesbian affair. Soon, Watanuki, Mitsuko's fiancé, appears and starts his own manipulative game to make sure he's not left out and empty-handed. Eventually, Kotaro, Sonoko's husband, starts to become suspicious and begins his own investigation, which pulls him right amid Sonoko and Mitsuko. As the relationship between all the participants becomes more intricate and difficult to sustain, each one starts to look for a somewhat reasonable to the Japanese face-saving solution, and they somewhat agree on a way out, but don't follow the plan the way it was devised, which leads to a tragic culmination of the whole affair, and that's the basic plot. What are my thoughts about Quicksand? It is one of Tanizaki's masterpieces. The basic argument might be fairly universal: workaholic husband and bored housewife looking to add some excitement to their dull lives, but receiving a lot more than initially they were looking for. And slowly but progressively they are pulled deeper and deeper into the metaphoric quicksand of this novel but complex relationship. Because of its exotic setting, for us in the West, the style of the plot might seem a bit alien, but its theme of taboo and somewhat forbidden love is universal. From the beginning, the narration creates this lingering sense of coming disaster, and it intensifies as the plot progresses. The four principal characters have a lot in common with each other, but they also represent different ways of dealing with their emotional needs, and all are affected and limited by the social norms of the place and time they live in, modernizing Japan. Sonoko, the wife, on the surface accepts her place in the society and represses her sexual urges, but occasionally, under the emotional pressure, she caves in. Her affair with Mitsuko is not the first betrayal of her husband, since she admits at the beginning of the book to having a previous affair with a man. She is pretty aware of her wrongdoings and tries to get them under control, but she underestimates the strength of her needs. And even if it was wrong to be secretly in love with another man, what was so bad about being in love with a woman, someone of my own sex? She thinks that if she focuses away from men, she will be able to restrain herself, because she doesn't realize it is not men who are just one of the possible delivery tools, but something much more vague and intrinsic and less defined that is driving her actions, and it is proven when Mitsuko appears. Mitsuko, a young woman not willing to accept the position society has placed her in, competes for control with men, specifically Kotaro and Watanuki, perhaps to prove she is as capable as they are, but being a woman she does it indirectly through deceit and manipulation. Seems that her motivation is not satisfaction of her sexual needs, but rather proving her self-worth. The problem is that she is going about it in a wrong way, which is probably caused by her youth and inexperience, and also her domineering personality in a place where she is expected to be submissive. Kotaro, the husband, who on the surface is direct and in control of his outer and inner world, and makes his best effort to control the people around him, but he is not as strong as he would like to be or believes he is, and falls victim to his own unrecognized and unrealized emotions, because they cannot be controlled, not in the long run, just delayed. That was his dilemma. He could not control and underestimated his feelings. He could only face and deal with things he could see, such as Watanuki and his scheme. Watanuki, the fiancé whose outer appearance, handsome and charming, contradicts his personality, petty and feminine, and his visual manliness is further impaired by a sexual dysfunction which makes him desperate and turns him into a liar and manipulator. But because he is a man, he is not as good at it as the women, and his attempts are rather obvious and predictable. The fifth character, who is somewhat obscure, but has a crucial impact on the outcome of the whole affair, is Mitsuko's family maid, who feels she was unjustly punished and seeks revenge. Quicksand primarily is about sexual taboos and curiosities and how they can impact our personal lives. I think Tanizaki liked the traditional Japan, but he felt a bit out of place in it, thus his somewhat contradictory obsession with modernization and the West. His sense of displacement was caused by his sexual wandering and probably experiences, and the Quicksand's plot and protagonist seems to reflect his own views and even fears of how one's sexual abnormality can create a larger destructive cycle in people's lives. Tanizaki presents love not as the usual and overdone, beautiful, happy, and romantic utopia, but as a destructive force, and describes its other, ugly side that causes obsession, manipulation, lying, betrayal, infidelity, jealousy, and perversity. The book also deals with Tanizaki's another favorite subject, after sexuality, tradition versus modernization, and hints at the difficult and oppressive situation of women in traditional societies, with rather strict rules of behavior and plethora of physical and psychological punishments for the perpetuator. Not to say the men were not obligated to follow social rules, but there was wider freedom of choice and more flexibility and leniency when trespassing the accepted norms. Sonoko, the traditional, versus Mitsuko, the modern, in love and hate relationship with constant battles for control and difficulty of maintaining balance. Initially it is Sonoko who is the instigator and pursuer, but the roles quickly reverse and she becomes hunted and manipulated. This dynamic seems to represent Japan's existential struggle during Tanizaki's life, which led to the World War II disaster. But since then, the country seems to have found fragile but lasting balance. Also, on the same note, Kotaro and Watanuki clash in their own traditional versus modernizing conflict, where the former exhibits honorable but dying samurai spirit, and the latter is the future of Japanese manliness, effeminate and insecure. I think the title is somewhat interesting. It is translated into English as Quicksand, which is quite self-explanatory, and it refers to the metaphoric sand trap the protagonists fell into, and the more moves they make, the deeper they sink. So I found myself sinking deeper and deeper into the quicksand, and although I said to myself I had to escape, by this time I was helpless. I knew I was being used by Mitsuko, and that all that while she was calling me her dear sister, she was actually making a fool of me. Initially, it is the two women who get stuck in the sand because of their sexual transgression, to whom Watanuki offers imaginary rope to pull themselves out, but in exchange for some tough promises. Later, Kotaro, who is a bit more altruistic, hands them a fictional branch, but instead of pulling themselves out, the two women pull him in, and the more they struggle, the deeper they sink until there is no way out. In Japanese, the title is rather ambiguous, manji, and its symbol is a left-facing swastika, which in the book is supposed to mean the connection between four lovers. I remember looking at the Google map of Tokyo a few years back and noticed all the Buddhist temples were marked with swastikas. So I looked into it and found out that in Buddhism, swastika means footprints of Buddha. I think the symbol is still there, but who knows? Google is full of liberal whiners, and maybe some of them got offended and had it changed for another, more politically correct, inclusive glyph. There is an Italian film adaptation of the book titled The Berlin Affair, which takes place in the late 1930s Nazi Germany, and it might be somewhat misguided reflection on the Japanese symbol for the title of the book. Some people wrongly might think that the book has some metaphoric connection to fascism and Nazi Germany. But no, the novel was written before Hitler came to power. To sum it up, Quicksand is another beautifully written Tanizaki novel that deals with hidden, repressed, and taboo, but ever-present and common subject of what we can call perverse or unorthodox human feelings, and the resulting behavior and problems they create. It could be called a Machiavellian story of intimate relations and a victimless crime, since there are no victims but rather various levels of villains. The book's plot is pragmatic and calculated, but its beauty lies in the manner the story is presented, in poetic and even romantic prose. Japanese can make anything sound and look beautiful. Just look at their portrayal of violence and death. Anyway, the novel probably will appeal to the Tanizaki fans like myself, or general admirers of early modern Japanese literature. If I was to compare Tanizaki to any Western writers, the one that comes to mind is Nabokov, but that's very subjective. For the visual art lovers, there is a beautiful 1963 Japanese adaptation of the novel into film, which later was remade a couple of times. If you like to see book adaptations, then for the Japanese literature, there's nothing better than the Japanese cinema. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback, which I transform into a hardcover leather-bound edition. To make the cover, I use grade A naturally tan hide I buy from Tenerife, North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First, I designed the cover, and what I did here, I took this Japanese woodblock print, probably from the 18th century, of the two women sharing a bed, doing God knows what, probably happily frolicking, and I thought this image nicely related to the book's plot. This is the back with the blurb, and inside front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into leather hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100, but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel, and for every 100 donations, I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So, if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So, if you want one, don't snooze, or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.